What if one small decision, made out of desperation, opened the door to a stranger who carried a life-changing secret? This is the story of a single father fighting to survive, his young son holding on to hope, and the mysterious tenant who would turn their world upside down in ways they never imagined. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Marcus stood in the middle of his small rented house, the kind of place that carried the smell of years gone by. The paint on the walls had faded into a dull gray, and the old couch in the corner sagged from too many restless nights. A stack of unpaid bills sat on the kitchen counter, each envelope a reminder of how tight life had become. He rubbed his hands together, grease still clinging from the mechanic shop where he worked long shifts. It never seemed to be enough. No matter how many hours he put in, the money slipped away faster than it came. Food, rent, school supplies, it all weighed on him like a heavy stone tied to his chest. In the next room, his 7-year-old son Jamie played quietly on the floor with a toy car missing one wheel. The boy's laughter echoed softly, a sound that gave Marcus strength on the hardest days. No matter how tired or broke he felt, Jamie's smile made it all worth fighting for. Still, Marcus knew love alone wouldn't keep the lights on. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills. His head pounded with the same question he asked himself every month. How will we get through this? Then his eyes wandered toward the spare bedroom, barely furnished, a place once meant for guests who never came. An idea slowly formed. Perhaps, if he rented out that room, it might be just enough to keep them afloat. The thought wasn't easy. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to invite strangers into his home, but desperate times didn't leave much choice. He grabbed a notepad, scribbled out a short advertisement, and later posted it online. He didn't expect much. Who would want to live in a run-down part of town, in a house that barely held itself together? The next day, just after sunrise, Marcus was tightening a loose bolt on his truck when the sound of the doorbell rang. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the door. Standing there was a young woman, no older than 20, holding a small suitcase. Her name was Clara. She introduced herself in a soft voice, polite but confident. She asked if the room was still available. Marcus studied her for a moment, a little taken aback. She didn't look like someone who belonged in this neighborhood. Her clothes were simple but carried a touch of grace. Her words were careful, her tone steady, almost refined. Marcus cleared his throat and nodded, leading her inside. As Clara stepped into the living room, her eyes moved over the peeling wallpaper, the old furniture, the uneven floorboards. Marcus braced himself for rejection, certain she would turn around and leave. But instead, Clara smiled gently. "It's perfect," she said. Marcus blinked, unsure if she was serious. Perfect was the last word he would use for this house. Yet something in her voice carried truth, as though she wasn't looking at the flaws, but at something deeper. He showed her the spare room. It was plain, with just a bed and a small dresser. Clara placed her suitcase on the floor and nodded again. "This will do just fine." Marcus felt a flicker of relief. He didn't ask too many questions. Part of him wondered why a girl like her would want to live here, but another part of him was too tired to overthink it. If she was willing to pay rent, that was enough. That evening, after Clara settled in, Jamie wandered into the living room with his crayons. He sat on the carpet, sketching uneven lines on scraps of paper. Clara joined him, kneeling beside him with an easy smile. Soon, the room filled with laughter as Jamie proudly showed her his drawings. Marcus watched from the doorway. For the first time in weeks, his house felt less heavy. There was warmth again, a kind of peace that had been missing. As the night grew late, Marcus lay awake in his bed, listening to the faint sound of Jamie's giggles still echoing in his ears. He thought about the stranger now sleeping under his roof. Clara was different. Too graceful for this place, too calm for the chaos around them. Yet, in the middle of his doubt, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And though he couldn't explain it, he sensed that opening his door to this young woman would change their lives in ways he could never imagine. The first few days after Clara moved in were quiet. She kept to herself, unpacked her few belongings, and settled into the spare room with ease. Marcus didn't expect her to stay long, but something about her calm presence began to fill the spaces of the small house. Jamie, curious as ever, was the first to break the silence. One evening, as Marcus fixed dinner, Jamie tugged at Clara's hand and asked her to read him a story. Clara sat beside him on the worn couch, her voice steady and warm as she read from an old book. Jamie's eyes lit up and his laughter spilled into the room. Marcus stood in the doorway, quietly watching. It had been a long time since his son had looked that happy. Over the weeks that followed, Clara became more than just a tenant. She became part of their routine. When Marcus came home late from the mechanic shop, he often found dinner already made and waiting. Clara never said much about it, only offered a small smile as she set plates on the table. When groceries appeared on the counter, she claimed they were extras from a friend. Marcus knew better, but he didn't press. Pride kept him from asking questions he wasn't ready to hear answers to. Jamie adored her. After school, he would rush home, eager to show Clara his drawings or tell her about his day. She listened with patience, her attention never drifting, as though his stories were the most important thing in the world. Marcus noticed the way Jamie's shoulders relaxed when she was near, the way his son seemed lighter. Clara also brought small moments of comfort Marcus hadn't realized were missing. One stormy evening, thunder rattled the windows and the lights suddenly flickered out. Jamie whimpered, fear in his small voice. Before Marcus could reach for a flashlight, Clara lit a few candles and pulled Jamie close. She began telling a story, her words painting pictures of a brave child who faced storms without fear. Jamie's eyes grew wide, his fear replaced with wonder. Marcus stood in the shadows, his heart swelling with gratitude. As the days stretched into months, Marcus found himself wondering about Clara. She was kind, thoughtful, and far too graceful for the rough neighborhood they lived in. Sometimes he noticed little details he couldn't ignore. A necklace that looked expensive tucked under her sweater. A phone call ended abruptly the moment he walked into the room. The way she observed everything, as though she was studying life itself. But Clara never offered explanations, and Marcus never asked. He told himself it didn't matter who she was or where she came from. What mattered was the way she cared for Jamie, the way she eased the weight of their daily struggles. Still, curiosity lingered. At night, lying awake, Marcus often replayed the moments he had seen her kindness in action. Clara had changed the rhythm of their home. She wasn't family, yet she fit so naturally into their lives. The neighborhood, once a place Marcus felt ashamed of, seemed different with her there. When she walked down the street with Jamie, holding his hand, neighbors smiled more often. The old house, though still worn and tired, felt alive again. Marcus couldn't deny it. Clara had brought something more valuable than money into his home. She had brought peace. One evening, after Jamie had gone to bed, Marcus sat at the table with a cup of coffee. Clara joined him, sitting quietly across from him. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus said, "You've done more for us than I can ever repay." Clara shook her head softly. "Sometimes, giving doesn't need repayment," she replied. Her words carried a weight that lingered in the air. Marcus studied her for a moment. He wanted to ask who she really was, why she had chosen to live here of all places, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't ready to share her story, and he wasn't ready to push. As the clock ticked on, Marcus realized something he hadn't felt in years. Hope no longer seemed like a stranger. Clara's presence had turned a struggling household into something closer to a home. It was a fragile bond, unspoken but strong. And though Marcus didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing for certain. Life had changed the moment Clara walked through his door. And deep down, he sensed that this change was only the beginning. Saturday mornings in Marcus's life were usually quiet. The streets in his neighborhood stayed still, broken only by the hum of an old lawnmower or the sound of children riding bikes. On this particular morning, Marcus crouched beside his truck in the driveway, a wrench in hand. The sun was pale, the kind that carried a chill even though spring had arrived. Jamie sat nearby, drawing in the dirt with a stick, humming to himself. Inside the house, Clara was folding laundry, her movements calm and unhurried. She had been living with them for months now, and the small house felt different, lighter, warmer, alive. Yet in the back of Marcus's mind, unanswered questions still lingered. Who exactly was Clara? Why had she chosen his home, his neighborhood, his family? As Marcus tightened a bolt, he heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel. Lifting his head, he froze. A sleek black car rolled slowly to a stop in front of the house. The kind of car he had only seen in magazines or parked in front of offices he couldn't afford to step into. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a shine. His posture carried authority, and his watch gleamed in the morning light. Marcus stood, wiping his greasy hands on a rag, uncertain what to say. Jamie looked up from his drawings, eyes wide. "Dad, who's that?" he whispered. Before Marcus could answer, the man's eyes landed on Clara, who had stepped out onto the porch, her laundry basket still in hand. His expression shifted, relief mixed with frustration. "Clara," the man said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank heavens, we've been worried sick." The basket slipped slightly in Clara's arms before she set it down. She didn't move forward right away. Her face carried a mix of guilt and quiet determination. Marcus blinked, the pieces beginning to fall into place. The expensive necklace, the secret phone calls, her graceful manner, it all suddenly made sense. Clara wasn't just any tenant. She was the daughter of someone powerful, someone wealthy. The man stepped closer, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Sweetheart, you can't just disappear like this. Do you have any idea what it's been like not knowing where you are?" Jamie clutched Marcus's leg, confused. "Is he her dad?" he asked softly. Clara finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, Jamie, this is my father." She turned toward the man in the suit. "I told you, Dad, I needed to do this. I wanted to understand what life was like outside of mansions and drivers and endless money. I needed to know what it felt like to live simply, to meet people who value more than wealth." The man's gaze shifted to Marcus, scanning him up and down. Marcus suddenly felt the weight of his worn boots, his oil-stained hands, the tired house standing behind him. He braced himself for judgment, and he wasn't wrong. The man's eyes narrowed, skeptical and sharp, but before a word could be spoken, Jamie let go of Marcus's leg and ran toward Clara. He tugged gently at her hand, his voice small but full of honesty. "Please don't go," Jamie whispered. "You make Dad smile." Silence fell across the driveway. Clara's father froze, his expression breaking for the first time. He looked from his daughter's face to the small boy's earnest eyes, then back at Marcus, whose tired stance carried both humility and strength. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the older man's posture softened. He turned to Marcus and extended his hand. His voice, once sharp, lowered into something almost fragile. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for giving my daughter something money cannot buy. A home, a family, kindness." Marcus hesitated, then reached out and shook the man's hand. Their worlds could not have been more different, yet in that moment, they were connected by something deeper. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she stood tall. "This was my choice," she said softly. and I have no regrets." The black car remained parked at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the morning light, but the atmosphere had shifted. What began as confrontation had turned into understanding. Marcus knew their lives had changed forever. The truth was out, and the quiet mystery that had followed Clara was finally clear. She wasn't just a tenant. She was a daughter searching for meaning, and in their small home, she had found it. And though Marcus didn't know what the future would bring, he understood one thing. Life was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, about trust, about bonds formed when least expected. After that Saturday morning when Clara's truth was revealed, life inside Marcus's small house slowly found its balance again. The black car eventually drove away, and Clara remained for a little while longer before returning to her father's world. Yet the bond that had been formed in that humble home did not break. Weeks turned into months, and Clara visited often. Sometimes she brought books for Jamie. Other times, she left bags of groceries on the counter with the same quiet excuse she always used. Marcus never argued, though he knew those items came from her, not from a friend. She carried herself with the same grace as before, but now there was no secret between them. Marcus understood who she was, and somehow that made her kindness feel even more meaningful. Jamie continued to adore her. He would rush to the door whenever she arrived, eager to show her his drawings or pull her outside to play in the yard. Marcus watched from a distance, grateful but cautious. He knew Clara's world was different from theirs, yet her presence made their home feel richer than money ever could. One evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table helping Jamie with his schoolwork. Marcus leaned against the doorway, listening. Jamie was laughing as Clara explained math in a way that made it fun instead of frustrating. Marcus realized that his son was not just learning numbers, he was learning patience, encouragement, and the quiet power of being cared for. A few months later, an envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Jamie. Marcus opened it slowly, his hands shaking. Inside was a scholarship letter, granting full funding for Jamie's education. There was no sender listed, no explanation given, only the assurance that Jamie's future was secure. Marcus didn't need a name to know who was behind it. Clara had left her mark once again in a way that went far beyond generosity. Life went on, filled with work, school, and the ordinary rhythm of days. Clara's visits became part of that rhythm, weaving her into their lives like a thread that refused to be pulled loose. She wasn't just a tenant anymore. She was a friend, a sister figure to Jamie, and a reminder to Marcus that sometimes the most unexpected connections become the strongest ones. Years passed, and Jamie grew. Marcus grew older, his hair touched with gray, but his pride in his son only deepened. Clara continued to visit. Though her life remained split between two worlds, she never forgot the small house with peeling wallpaper, the place where she discovered that love and kindness mattered more than status or wealth. On the day of Jamie's graduation, the gymnasium filled with parents, teachers, and students. Marcus sat in the crowd, his heart heavy with pride. Clara was there too, seated beside him, her smile steady and warm. When Jamie walked onto the stage to give his speech, his voice carried through the room with confidence. "I stand here today," he began, "because of two people who never stopped believing in me. My father, who worked harder than anyone I have ever known, and a family friend who showed me that kindness and love are worth more than anything money can buy." The audience clapped, but Marcus only heard the sound of his own heartbeat. His eyes stung as he looked toward Clara. She returned his gaze with a quiet smile, one that held both gratitude and unspoken understanding. In that moment, Marcus realized the truth. Opening his home years ago had not just given him rent money. It had given him something priceless. It had created a bond that blurred the line between strangers and family. Life had tested him with hardship, but it had also rewarded him with an unexpected gift, the chance to see how compassion could change lives. Marcus leaned back in his seat, watching his son stand tall on the stage, watching Clara beside him with that gentle smile. And he knew with certainty that this was what mattered. Not money, not status, not the size of the house or the shine of a car. What mattered was the love shared, the trust built, and the unspoken promise that kindness never disappears. Sometimes the people we least expect walk into our lives and remind us that family isn't always about blood. It's about the bonds we create when we choose to care. And for Marcus, Jamie, and Clara, that bond had become a new kind of family, one built not on wealth, but on something far more enduring: hope, compassion, and the courage to open a door when it mattered most. And so what began as a simple act of survival became a story of love, trust, and an unbreakable bond. Remember, kindness is never wasted. It can change lives in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.